Hi, unmute. Hi, Mrs. Sheila. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? You can on your video if you want to.
Okay. I was just wondering, what about the presentation? How do you want to go about it?
We can share your screen.
Also, should I send it to you on email?
You can share
Or
your screen.
okay. Okay,
Yeah,
that's fine.
yeah.
So,
Can you do
um,
a demo of sharing your screen because I'm the host, so I'm not sure you can share your. Let's just do that.
okay. And then, but how do you want to go about it? Because I'm wondering, do we do the presentations or do you want to do do you want to do questions? How do you want to go about the session?
All right, the session is for an hour and 45 minutes, and it will start in another 10 minutes. So we'll give you
Mm-hmm.
an introduction, and then we'll give you like first 10 minutes. If you want to do your
Mm-hmm.
presentation at that time, is well and good. And then we will do a panel discussion, like discussion with the panelists, yeah.
Ah,
And then for the last 15 minutes will be the Q&A for the
I
audience.
see.
Yeah,
Okay,
all
let me
right.
just try sharing my screen. You tell me if you can see it. Whoa, so what do I do? Is it desktop one? Let me see. Microsoft
Hi,
PowerPoint.
Mr. Seseko.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Right, thank you for joining in.
It's a pleasure.
Yes. Do you have any presentation?
Yes, I do.
All right. I just have to tell you both that we just have. Sorry, can you all confirm me that you can hear me?
I can hear you. I can confirm. Thank you.
Mrs. Sheila?
Yes, I can. I'm also hearing you very well, loud and clear.
Thank you. We apologize for the delay. We'll just start the session in another 5 minutes. And I would like to just tell you that the other speakers, Mr. James Souley is physically present, and Mr. Patrick Musa from African Development Bank is also physically present.
Percent of their own money. So whatever it is, they won't lose their money, both interest and their principal. The eligibility criteria for green bond funding are basics. It should answer to the basic climate change environmental objectives like climate change mitigation, adaptation, conservation, biodiversity conservation, and the pollution control. The next thing that is particular for this thing, our monitor is not very sharp for us to be able to do some of this thing. Please move. Yeah, this is more or less a table. I don't know if anybody can see it clearly. Nobody can see anything. And because I needed to explain that these are some of the criteria you need. And by the time you take it out, the last, what is below is a green building. And that green building, all those, the first column is climate change mitigation. You see that it has 3 stars there. So all those things matter in your rating. That is how you select the project you use for green bond financing. The next thing you do is to see that at least you have high level equivalences of these things, because there are so many criteria in the world that you can use to do this thing. We have the CBI criteria, you have the EU, you have China, and there are so many other taxonomies. Each country is trying to develop their own taxonomy, but in a way, if it fits into a taxonomy and what you want to do is something that will fit into anyone, you will go to those people for certification, because you need to be certified before you can actually raise these bonds. Procedure, next slide please. If you look at this, if you look at this, if you are going to go into building, there are criteria basic in the CBI distance. Those criteria are there for you to look at and make sure you meet them before you do this. Please, the heading is wrong. That is not procedural activities. I think it's in the rush to get this thing done. I made that mistake. So let's look at the specific example I mentioned in Kenya. What Akon did was successfully use the first green bond. Okay, we'll talk about it. Okay, Akon, they said somebody from Akon will talk about the distance, but what is important is that they have the H certification on all their properties and they have all the competencies you need for them to be able to get these things done. Yeah, moving forward, what does Nigeria want to do? As a secretariat, we've been successful with the 2 agencies we have, so we're looking at 50 to 150 billion naira in the current year. Why we didn't go ahead to go to the market to do that is because we're in transition and you don't borrow on behalf of a government that is just coming in. That is why we pull the brake. So, but we'll eventually do that because we just need to do it to be able to move forward with all these processes. Every MDA, every ministry, department, and agency can put a project into the budget for us to be able to issue bond and fund. So this last slide is just some bragging right. Reporting is very, very key in green bond. Nigeria, we were 5th when they rated the reports that people have done, post-issuance report that people have done for the issuances they did in their country, where the secretary was able to get a report done that is good enough to be rated as 5th in the world. That rating was by CBI. CBI is based in, it's Climate Bond Initiative. It's a body based in London. They are verifiers and certifiers. So Nigerian embrace green bond issuance an innovative and alternative way of raising finance domestically. And this to assist Nigeria in the national determined contribution and the low carbon pathway for socio-economic development. We have also pledged that by 2060 we will be net zero. These are expensive business. To do that, you require $460 billion to be able to do it. Our whole 10 years budget will not be up to that. So meaning that Nigeria cannot do it alone. Private sectors have to come in. And the encouragement is that we're looking at this for the opportunities that are available to private sectors to come in because Nigeria is ready for a PPP. And how you can do that is to more or less find out what is happening within ministries and see how you can collaborate with them. By the time you come with a PPP that is strong enough, that is vetted by the body in charge of PPP, we'll be able to intervene and see how we can raise, how we can make it part of the green bond issuance we will do to finance such projects. I think that is the last slide you have. Sorry, I've taken too much time.
Thank you, sir. But that's okay if you take the time. I think you covered all the points on the topic. I will next invite Mrs. Sheila Mora, the head of ESG and Blended Finance of Akon Holdings from Kenya. Mrs. Sheila, can you hear me? Mr. Farai, can you hold me? Mr. Farai? Can't hear. Sorry, we are having technical issue with the Zoom. I will ask Mr. Patrick Musa from African Development Bank to go ahead.
Thank you very much. Do you have my slide? Thanks, Madam Chairperson. I'm sitting, but I'll say I'm standing here in the shoes of the Director General of the African Development Bank Country Office in Nigeria. and further on behalf of the president that was invited to attend this meeting. Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, just hold on. I am a transport engineer at the African Development Bank office here in Nigeria. And so to come and talk about sustainability and green things and so forth, yeah, I had to rely on colleagues. We have an urban division in in our infrastructure department who are very helpful in developing these slides that I'm coming to show. And I also have here my colleague, Dr. Babalola, who was manager before in the transport sector, but is here to assist the bank in Nigeria. So, if I can proceed. Go into slides, please. Yeah, next slides. All right, thank you very much. African cities are the most rapid growing cities in the world. They are the youngest and they are changing fast. This is what you must have already heard from yesterday. I'm just bringing it in for emphasis. Urbanization in Africa will contribute to economic outcomes and higher standards of living. And you know, in the cities, there are more facilities, and so people have higher standards of living. Urbanization, therefore, presents immense opportunities to accelerate progress towards the 2030 and the 2063 development agendas, and for promoting continental integration in the context of African continental free trade area. Next slide, please. Urbanization, yes, urbanization is not without challenges, and I think this has led to a meeting like this. Next slide. We have here diverse differences in buildings. If you look on the left side of the building, the materials, most of the materials used in this building are biodegradable compared to the ones on the right-hand side. But I think we can do better for the buildings on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. Yeah, the challenges of urbanization, as you can see here, congestion and shanty towns, which have environmental issues. Our urbanization is culminating into cities with low resilience and unsustainable urban forms, with more than half of the population living in overcrowded informal settlements. Next slide, please. So now the question is, to ask is, where can African cities go from here? How can cities accelerate Africa's trajectory towards resilience and a sustainable built environment? With 80% of this growth occurring in cities, it is clear that sustainability needs to be a core principle of all future buildings. Africa is rich in natural sustainable materials, and these projects, as you can see, demonstrate how sustainability can be put into our buildings. Yeah, as you can see in those pictures there. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, these are part of sustainable buildings that we have picked up. Next slide, please. All right. Now, the crux of this meeting or of this session is financing of sustainable buildings. If you move to the next slide, please. Yes. Now we'll show you the African Development Bank's strategy. there are two objectives of this strategy, two main objectives. Inclusive growth, which means everybody should be moved along, age, gender, and geography. Then the next objective is transition to green growth. This is our target, right? We should build resilience, we should manage natural resources, and we should build sustainable infrastructure. And 5 operational priorities are infrastructure development, regional integration, private sector development, governance and accountability, then skills and technology. And these are done under 3 special areas. We have to consider fragile states, agriculture and food security, then gender. Next slide, please. All right. So, as you can see, there has been a decrease in foreign direct investment in Africa from 2021 to 2022. So this, as we continue to lose these resources, we have to think about sustainable sources of resources to do our projects. Next slide, please. So how does the bank finance its projects? We have windows here, the African Development Bank window. When I talk about African Development Bank, it's the African Development Bank group, but within that we have ADB funds and we have ADF funds. ADB funds are used for sovereign loans as well as private sector financing. And for middle-income countries, ADF loans are for low-income countries. And within that also, we have Nigeria Trust Fund. Then we can gather co-financing from other funding agencies. Then, of course, we have trust funds, which I talked about in the last session there. Trust funds are like the Clean Technology Fund, which sometimes are placed under us to look at to manage. Then also the Canada African Development Bank Climate Fund, which I talked about. These are funds that especially we use for climate funding. Next slide, please. And this is not clear, but it's just all the, I mean, they are under, these funding vehicles are under the other funding mechanisms that came from the last slide. Move forward, please. Yes, but on top of that, we are looking at innovative ways, and the African Development Bank, together with the African Union and other players in financing on the continent, came together to form the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. And there is a link there to that funding, which you can access and look at how it can be useful to you. Next slide, please. And also, there is the African Development Bank Green Bond, and I think here we have expertise here on green bonds, and we can get more information from that. But the African Development Bank also has formed a green bond so that we can finance green facilities. Next slide. Yes, I thank you very much. And also within the bank itself, we have the Urban and Municipal Development Fund, which is particular to this city development, which we use for preparation of urban projects. It's good if they are green, like I said in the last session. And all these funding vehicles that I talked about, we stress sustainability as well as when they are green. If your project is sustainable and it's towards green growth, you have an advantage and it can go through the board very easily. And also you can have other concessional facilities if you go the green way. So this is a fund in our transport sector, which we use for urban development projects preparation. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, and publications there, financial products handbook, we have it there. Then we have another publication, Africa's Urbanization Dynamics, which was produced last year. Next slide, please. And now, our Urban Development Division, which helped to develop these slides. This is the information about them. If you have urban projects and you want them to be looked at by the bank, these are the contacts there. Next slide, please. Yes, I think that's the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We appreciate the initiative about African Development Bank in Green Building Finance in Nigeria. Next would be Mrs. Sheila Mora, the head of ESG and Blended Finance from Account Holdings.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's
No, Sheila, we cannot.
sorry, just a second. Are you able to see now?
Yes, please.
And for those of you who are familiar with EDGE, you either have the preliminary certification during the design stage, and post this, once the building is operational, then you go for your final certification. So once we had this commitment and we already had the initial portfolio having the preliminary certification, we were able to then approach CBI. That's a climate bonds initiative, for them to be able to certify this bond as being green. And so what that does for you is that you've got an external party, that's a benchmark in the industry, certifying your bond to be green. And that is critical, because of the principles of green bonds, which really looks at, the use of proceeds to ensure that there is no greenwashing, so to speak. So in our case, I'll just go straight to what we're able to do. So we're able to raise about 5.7 billion Kenya shillings. That translates to about $57 million through a medium-term note program that commenced in 2017, which is actually being retired next year. The features of why this bond was successful, at the time, that we also partnered, with various partners in the entire ecosystem, and we had a lot of support from various parties. So the bond was also guaranteed by Garantco, which is part of the Private Infrastructure Development Group. This was actually the first listed green bond in Kenya. And we also cross-listed this at the London Stock Exchange in 2020. And, the bond was initiated, was from various points, which I'll just talk about shortly. And because of that, it's been able to win, a couple of awards, both here locally and also internationally. And it was also the first corporate bond to be rated by Moody's in Kenya, which was rated on a B1 on a global rating scale and on a double A2 on the Kenya national scale. So if I can just talk about the features of what this bond was. So it was a senior secured, rated and guaranteed issue. And then also the credit enhancement secured 50% of the principal and interest. And this was done by Garantco. And so the funding structure is that we had an upfront commitment, though the drawdowns would be deferred or have been deferred, because we've actually been, it is a 5-year bond with an early redemption with a fixed rate of about 12.25. Now, the beauty with it being a green bond is that the withholding, usually the interest would be subject to tax. But because it was green and because of what the government is doing, the interest actually was exempt from tax. So the principal security of the bond was the land and the improvements thereon. That's ideally the buildings that we're doing. And I've just talked about the certification that was done by the CBI, the Climate Bonds Initiative. So if I can just talk about what would constitute a successful offering, it would have to be, the entire ecosystem supporting what an organization, like in our case, because we're a private firm, is doing, or what, even if it's a private organization, is doing. And so what we're able to leverage on really was to be able to get, support from all these different parties. And if I can just talk about the Acorn Green Bond, how we went about it is that we had the support from the Emerging Africa Infrastructure Fund. So they were actually able to anchor the bond to the tune of about 30%. Then I've talked about the 50% credit enhancement, the guarantee that we got from Garantco. We also got a lot of technical support from FSD Africa. The process and the principles of raising a green bond, it's a very, would I use the word tedious, a very lengthy and a very detailed process. And so we're able to get some technical support from FSD Africa to enable us to do this. And of course, a lot of support, from local investors who were able to come in, including the tier 1 banks, pension funds, reinsurance companies, to be able to ensure that the bond was actually, a success when we did it. I'll talk about the REITs shortly, but with the launch of the REITs in 2020, we were able to secure $10 million from an equity anchor. And this really just helped the REITs to be able to take, to be anchored, and to be able to do very well. We also had a lot of support from local investors, and these include, similar to the bond, pension schemes, insurance and reinsurance companies, and high net worth individuals. So to just talk about what the REITs are. So Acorn was able to raise funds through what we call the real estate investment trusts, and we call them the Acorn Student Accommodation Real Estate Investment Trusts. Now, in our case, were able to establish, or to launch 2 REITs. When I started, I talked about us being a vertically integrated. So we were able to do a development REIT, which now takes care of the development, of the assets and gets them ready for the property team to be able to acquire them and then run them. So we've got 2 REITs. We've got the Acorn Development REIT, and we've got the Acorn Student Accommodation Income REIT. So we have actually been able to separate these 2 REITs in terms of how they operate and even just the governance structures that have been put around this. And the main principal function of the D-REIT is to therefore then acquire the land, through a very detailed lay down process to ensure that the land is free of encumbrances, it's good for development, and you're able to obtain all your statutory approvals for this piece of land. Then we go through the pre-development process.
Sorry, Mrs.
Being
Sheila.
able to get all your packages for you to be able to go out into tender.
Mrs. Sheila, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, can I cut you there if it's not rude to you? Sorry. We'll just come back to that. While I'll ask Mr. Ferai Kesko,
Okay.
African Go Green Fund lead Signum, to point on his perspective on financing green buildings, and we'll come back to you. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not sure. I can't hear you. Sorry.
No, if you can hold
Good
on,
afternoon.
I'll
Can you
ask.
hear me?
Yeah. Yes, Mrs. Ferai.
Would you like me to start?
Yes, please. Yes,
or-
please.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. My name is Farai Sekeso. I am based out of London, and I work with a company called Signum Capital, formerly known as Lion's Edge, which would be a name that is familiar to some of you on this panel. I lead within Signum Capital Asset Management business, African that is focused on provision of financing for energy efficient projects across the African continent. So, without further ado, I'll just sort of go into my slides quickly. Please confirm if you can see the slides.
Yes, we could see your slides. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, formally with the name, but we're a boutique investment banking and asset management business that sort of provides specialist advice to DFIs, sovereigns, corporates, and foundations in sectors such as healthcare, infrastructure, agriculture, power and energy, and financial services on our investment banking side of the business. We also have an asset management side of the business where we manage a family of funds, all of which are dedicated towards Africa, and I'll go into that just shortly. In terms of representation across Africa, we have offices in Nairobi and Lagos, and then we have an office here in London where I am based, another office in Dubai, an office in New York, and an office in Amsterdam. This sort of puts us in a place where we are able to tap into global expertise, apply like I said, we manage a family for $750 million of funds that are geared towards slash energy efficiency on the extreme right capital. And then the fifth fund sort of is more product specific and provides funding to support local currency bonds across the African continent. And its role really is to promote the development of African capital markets. The final distinction I'll make across the funds that we manage is that the E3 Capital fund you see on the extreme end there is an equity fund. So it provides equity funding to businesses that demonstrate reduction in greenhouse gases. So, as Signum, we have an interest in sustainability and renewable energy across the funds that we manage, but also through the investment banking work that we do. Now, just to zone in on the Africa Go Green Fund that I manage within Signum, our strategy, like I've said, is for supporting energy efficiency and greenhouse gas abatement initiatives. And to do that, we have a couple of sectors that we look at, green buildings being one of them, right? And we'll go into detail. We look at all African countries to provide financing to, but we also prioritize West Africa. So within our fund, while we can deploy anywhere on the continent, if there are opportunities in West Africa, we would like to pursue those in the first instance, but that doesn't keep us from deploying capital elsewhere. We look to support businesses that are reducing emissions and having a social impact. And by social impact, we're talking about jobs, better livelihoods, better outcomes, gender-based outcomes, or gender things that sort of help with, such as a 2x challenge, for instance, that we look at. And finally, because the sectors we look at as Africa Go Green are very new in the context of the African continent. If you look at green buildings, you look at green mobility, you look at industrial energy efficiency, you look at green appliances and solutions, we tend to want to offer bespoke structures that meet our client needs. And we're able to provide financing in both local currency or foreign currency, and the local currency instruments we need. So just to go into why we think as Africa Go Green, green buildings are important, and they're one of the 4 things that we do. I've shown 2 pie charts here, one that shows you share of energy consumption in Africa, and the other that shows you share of CO2 emissions across different sectors. What you will find on the left side is buildings consume approximately 61% of the energy in Africa. And I mean, you look at different sources, the average is, or the range is anything from 50 to 65%. The source we've looked at is 61%. That is a significant portion of energy consumption, and that is buildings in the sense of, if it's residential, if it's industrial, if it's, commercial buildings. This is the entire spec of buildings across the continent. So it's a big portion of energy consumption. And then if you look at the share of emissions that are related to, across different sectors on the continent, again, you'll see buildings contributing 10% directly. And this is on the back of things such as, use of energy for heating purposes, for lighting. And then you've got the indirect, which, comes through industrial use, that comes through other areas, right? And so if you look at the share of emissions, when you look at buildings, again, they sort of contribute a massive portion to emissions. And when you put these 2 things together and you think about the mandate of the Africa Go Green Fund, it leaves us in a place where green buildings is a focus that we need to be diverting our attention towards in terms of supporting the development of green infrastructure and green buildings in particular, because it reduces emissions and energy consumption. And so, I mean, for us, the first thing is building and construction in general accounts for 10 to 15% of the African GDP. So it's a key sector. It's a massive sector on the continent. We focus on it. 2, just based on the charts I have shown, it is key to decarbonization and reducing emissions, and therefore critical to Africa achieving some of its climate goals. Thirdly, and I think the gentleman from AFGB has said, is there is a massive investment opportunity in the space of buildings and green buildings in particular, and more so in the residential space. And this is on the back of improving or increasing urbanization that is happening on the African continent, the growth in population that is leading in to a need in more accommodation and better quality accommodation. Secondly, fourthly, green buildings alone, on average, if you look at the major African cities such as Nairobi, Cairo, Johannesburg, Lagos, and the like, only account for 12% of the total building stock when you think about it. And if you think about it relative to the share of energy consumption that buildings have, or the share of CO2 emissions that buildings have, this is fairly small. And so we're looking to play our part in increasing that share of green buildings on the continent. Fifthly, I said the impact that we look for is that they create jobs and they improve quality of life. And finally, I think what we're trying to do is to bridge the financing gap that is there to meet the needs for Africa. So when we look at this Africa Go Green and the mandate of the fund, which is a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and improvement in energy efficiency, green buildings is a no-brainer. What have we been seeing then? Because it's a fairly new space on the continent. Like I said, it's 12% stock of building stock currently. What we know is they're increasing sector-wide initiatives driven by national green building councils and societies, such as here, Kenya's now had a green building society. There's a green building society or Green Building Council of Nigeria. There's one in South Africa. There's stuff coming up in other parts of West Africa. So we're seeing, individuals and companies starting to come together to try and push the sector, which is good. We're also seeing governments starting to play a role in legislating and providing investment incentives to support green building. And some of these things are through performance standards or energy efficiency performance that are being sort of put into building codes as legislation is developed. And then what we're also seeing, and this is the advantage that Africa has, is the innovation that's happening in the green building space, and Africa being able to leapfrog because of the way the world is now a global village. Africa is able to import some of the latest technologies in green buildings. I think there's some projects that are happening, say in Ghana, that are using some of the best, most cutting edge technology to reduce emissions. So that we're seeing a lot of that. On the supply side, what we're starting to see is there's a shift amongst the development community, the developer community, and I think my colleague who's just spoken has sort of started to decide that they want to look at green buildings alone. I think this is good and it will help. We're seeing new developers coming into the market, so first-time developers wanting to go into the space to try and take advantage of the opportunities that the green building space provides. We're starting to see a lot of vertically integrated business models becoming a differentiator, especially on the developer side, where they're looking to control costs that are associated with developing these projects, so they're able to provide an affordable product to the end users. And again, technology. On the demand side, I think, which is what is really important, is we're starting to see demand tick up across the commercial and retail, industrial, and residential. And that's primarily because of, if you read the recent report done by Real Estate Intelligence, green buildings are starting to attract a premium on rental and on selling prices. And that spread is anything, on the rental side, up to 15% versus what is not there. And on the selling side, I think we are seeing, or from that report, seeing anything between 15 and 30%. I think there's also a big leap towards retrofitting existing buildings to become energy efficient and improve their carbon footprint. And climate credentials are increasingly a key driver for demand, right? So we're seeing a pickup in this. So when we look at the sector having 12% stock in the major cities, we're looking at the developments in the sector and what the government is doing, what's happening on the supply side. It all bodes well. What does this mean, right? There's therefore a need for finance. And what we see in the market is their construction loans or construction financing that's there. Long-term loans are being offered, bridge facilities, their refinancing options, working capital options. But is this financing fit for purpose? I think, and so far we don't think so. So what are we bringing to the green building space as Africa Go Green? We're looking to support developers of green buildings and project companies. We're looking to support suppliers of equipment into green buildings. We're looking to support financial institutions that are going to fund green buildings. Our focus is Pan-African. We will look right across the continent. And what we're hoping to do is provide innovative, flexible, and catalytic capital to grow the space. The one thing I should say is our funding is not concessional, but it is catalytic. So if you look at what we're hoping to offer developers, and what we're offering, actually, not say what we're hoping to offer, is we're offering corporate debt or project finance type structures to developers, and those have tenors of anything from, short term, if it's, build to sell, to if it's build to rent, type structures. We're offering both hard and local currency. We're finding the local currency markets, for us at least at the moment, they're always more competitive than what we can do. As there's volatility in the currency markets and interest rate markets, it's hard to sort of hedge that out when you're looking at it from a dollar basis. But this is what the sector needs. So we're working very hard to find solutions there. When you look at suppliers and service providers, there we're looking to provide, corporate debt and structured finance that responds to the cash flow cycle of those businesses, right? So unlike the developers and project companies, there we're looking at more, asset working capital type structures, shorter term loans that are responsive to, working capital or business cycles. And then to financial institutions, we can offer corporate debt, we can offer guarantees for projects that they lend to that are in the green building space. So I think ultimately, what we're trying to do is engage with the sector, industry bodies across the continent, and to support market-wide initiatives. So just in terms of what we do and what you might expect us to provide when we're looking at financing for some of these projects. Unlike my previous colleague who's just sort of given a case study, because of the nature of the work that we do, it's confidential, and we're not able to sort of give case studies of specific companies, but we are engaged with players looking at residential developments in East Africa. We're engaged with players looking at commercial developments in both East and West Africa. And these transactions are at different stages of execution, and some will be announcing the not too distant future. So anyway, in terms of our focus, we look at all of Africa. I said West Africa is a priority. We can provide senior secured debt as corporate or project finance. And we can also do mezzanine instruments, but there are limits to what we can do. We typically are looking to support projects that are looking for $5 million going up. We can write checks on a single borrower basis of up to 18 million. We can give tenors of up to 12 years at the moment, but typically we're seeing people asking for anything between 5 and 10. And this, the lower end being on where their financing is for build to sell, and there's some pre-sale elements that are there. Areas of activity, like I said, commercial and industrial, residential, and then we can also support financial institutions. Use of proceeds, new builds, like I said, or we can do retrofits. Now, like Acorn, for us to provide financing to that as a green building, at a minimum, these projects have to be IFC EDGE certified. And the reason we go with the minimum of IFC EDGE certification is, as my colleague just said, is it guarantees a 20% reduction in energy use and other utilities. And as AGG, our focus is on reduction of emissions and GSGs. So at a minimum, if anyone is looking for financing from us, the buildings or the projects have to be EDGE certified. We can also look at other certifications such as LEED, BREEAM, and Green Star, but only in South Africa for Green Star. Otherwise, LEED and BREEAM we can look at across the continent. We've talked about the KPIs we look at. I think once you have an IFC EDGE certification, we know that there is at a minimum 20% reduction in the CO2 emissions or energy efficiency improvement. We also then look at things such as job creation and gender access. Ultimately, we're looking to provide practical, pragmatic, and tailored debt financing solutions, which we couple with our ability to execute with speed. The only thing I'll add here is we have a technical assistance facility, which we can use to support projects for various things such as market studies, feasibility studies, project development costs, and we require a minimum 20% contribution from the beneficiary in that instance. So to conclude, we are very interested to support the sector. We will continue to engage across the value chain. Will remain accessible to players and always look for areas where we can collaborate and partner to grow the green building industry. We will make use of our TA facility where we can to support market-wide initiatives to entrench green buildings. And we will continue to support industry bodies such as the Nigeria Green Building Council to try and push industry-wide initiatives in the sector.
Thank you so much, sir, for
Our
that.
investments, like I've said, yeah, our investors, I'm happy we have the AFDB alongside. They're an investor in our fund. We also have the KFW, IFC, NDF, and Calvert. So I'm happy to take any questions later on in terms of what financing we may make accessible to different parties. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ferai. I would like to invite now Mr. Mumu Kiange, the Development Director of Mividag Homes, to do a case study on the Garden City. Mr. Kianga, can you hear me?
Hi, Mr. Mumu was not able to attend. He's held up in another meeting, but I will run this session on his behalf, if you do not mind.
Yes, Mr. Kianga, before you start, I just need to tell you that you just got like 5 minutes.
No problem, no problem. Just run it really, yeah. Okay. So thank you. Just share my screen. In the meantime, my name is Solomon Zomo. I am the Chief Financial Officer for Mividag Homes. I'll just put up my screen. So maybe a brief background on Mividag Homes. So Mividag Homes is a partnership between Actis. I think we all are aware of who Actis are. They've been an investor in sustainable infrastructure in Africa and globally for quite a number of years. So they are a partner together with SPRA of India. Their full name is Shapoji Paloji, who have over 150 years of experience in residential developments in India, with projects cutting across the high end to the affordable market space. So Mividag Homes has been around for quite a number of years. Started around 2018, and the first projects that were undertaken were here at Garden City. So just proceeding on to show you what had been done before by Mividag Homes in one form or another. So we have some residences developed within Garden City. So Garden City is a 47-acre master planned mixed-use development encompassing residential, retail, office space. The residential element of it has various spans various sectors of the market, the high end. So what you're seeing here, top left, is the high end apartments that were done, a mix of villas, apartments. Then we have the mall, which is a 35,000 square meter mall within the development, and which anchors the entire development. Then we have some 12,000 square meters of office space that is let out to a number of tenants who work off here. And then finally, we have a residential project, which is an IFCH certified project that was completed last year and is currently in operation and use. So our business model is Mividag Homes is to design these projects and develop them for sale. We do not seek to hold the assets for rent. But that being said, is all our projects adhere to the green certification model, especially IFC, and they are all IFC certified. The current project is the Mividag Homes apartment.
And that is not even part of the reasons why we're not in the market. The challenge we have in the system is enormous. If government goes to the market today and they say they want to issue bond, it will still be oversubscribed because the people that have all this money, the pension fund, they're looking for what to invest in, and government is the more reliable person they can buy into whatever they want to sell. You understand me? So those are the challenge. These are the distortions in our economy we all have to get together to resolve. You understand? Something as little as governance issues that we overlook and we'll start pressing somebody that he has made some money. You understand me? It's part of the problem. And these are distortions in the system that we're battling with, and that is what is stopping us from making progress. We all have to be involved in resolving all those issues. Thank you for the question.
Hello, Mr. Farai, can you hear me? Mr. Farai?
Yes, I can.
All right. One of the question was about the eligibility criteria in getting the grants, all the funds for sustainable investment, because as you said, the IFC Edge was one of the benchmarking. To get the IFC pre-certification itself is in dollars, which is a huge investment for individual developers. So how do you think we tackle that? And the second question is, the conditionalities of the financial institutions are really high, or it cannot be met by local developers in country like Nigeria, where it's a mid-income, where the currency fluctuation is really high. So what is the suggestion that you give here?
No, I think in terms of accessing capital to do these studies, right? I mean, it's one of those things where when you're a lender, you expect the company to, or the developer to at least put up some of that capital. It shows some skin in the game. But what we can do is, if that certification has been done and we've considered it on a couple of transactions, is reimbursing part of that money via the TA facility if the project qualifies for us, right? So it is noted that it does take money to get certification, but we require the developers to show some commitment, I think, to a degree on that to get that done. And then in terms of conditionalities and cost of funding, I'm guessing that's probably where you were trying to get it. Like I said, we don't provide concessional financing. We provide catalytic capital. We want to take positions ordinarily where maybe some of the financial institutions wouldn't take those positions, with the view of creating a credit case for this to then grow the sector much wider in a much shorter space. And so where we can, and if it is possible, currency, funding out of the do it. But like I said, with where local volatility on the interest side, on the exchange rate side, at times we find if there are local financing options from commercial banks, though we always try to be competitive.
Thank you for that. Next question. The difference between green bond and carbon credits. Would somebody like to take that, Mrs. Sheila?
I think as Farai explained earlier, a green bond is basically just like your normal vanilla instrument to be able to raise funds, just that it's supporting assets that are green. And the assets that are green in the case of buildings can be certified by IFCH, by LEED, by BREEAM, as mentioned earlier by the other speakers. When you're talking about carbon credits, it's being able to obtain funding into your project or whatever it is because you're able to demonstrate a lower carbon footprint, and someone else then is able to buy this off or purchase this off from you. So a green bond ideally is to be able to fund a project. You cannot possibly use carbon credits, so to speak, to then finance a project. Those would come in later on to be able to, do certain elements that you'll be able to do. But then also the route for you to go through to be able to raise a sufficient amount of funds through carbon credits is still very limited, as it's still very nuanced right now, especially in Africa. So I would say the green bond is basically your typical traditional vanilla bond, but certifying green assets. And this has been talked about earlier by the speakers before me. I don't know if that's clear.
Yeah, thank you so much. The next question was how the SMEs can access all these green financing, because they have wonderful ideas and they are putting in their effort to make sustainable businesses, but the accessibility to finance has been a challenge in Nigeria. What do you suggest? All of the speakers can take on it.
SMEs assessing green bond. Let me take it from my own perspective. Ours is sovereign green bond. The other alternative is for subnational state governments that are issuing bonds. They will use it to finance a project that is from their own budget. Corporates can go to the market to raise green bond. You understand? But this is what I have to say about SME. SMEs are looking for cheap rates. That is not possible with green bonds. Anybody that invests in green bonds are ethical investors. They're ethical in their investments. So it's not that you go there and you think you get 10%, which is normally, in fact, below 10% is what SMEs are looking for. It won't happen with green bond. Maybe with time, when our economy matures, it can happen. But you will have to ride on others. Maybe a group of SMEs can get together, subject themselves to the due diligence, and be able to raise green bond as a collective. But as an individual, I don't think that is the idea for green bond issuance.
Can I take this just on the
Yes,
Africa
please.
Go Green
Yes,
side?
please.
What we are trying to do, you've probably seen on the slides there, is we've talked about supporting financial institutions. And there what we're trying to do is sort of say, we understand that on the SME side, perhaps the ticket of the size of the loans that we can do are probably too big, or want to do at a minimum, are probably too big for what some SMEs require. And so what we've been actively doing is trying to work with commercial banks who have capacity to do smaller ticket transactions, and provide them with financing that they can then on lend into these SMEs. Or alternatively, we could do a guarantee product that allows the financial institutions to on lend to SMEs with us taking some of that risk. Now, there's always structuring considerations that need to be taken into account, the cost of that funding, how that funding will then be channeled to SMEs, and the like. But we are trying to make sure that we are as broad and as inclusive as possible, because we know it's not only going to be achieved by the big scale financing projects that we do, but also stuff that is done on the smaller scale, especially when you're trying to do retrofits, put in energy efficient geysers, put in solar panels on your buildings, that necessarily won't be EDGE certified, but are working towards reducing emissions. So that's how we're looking at it. And we just need to work with commercial banks to, and that then also solves the currency issue as well, that SMEs might have, because then maybe those commercial banks on lend that money in local currency. So that's how we're looking at it, and we're actively looking at a couple of things in that space at the moment.
Thank you so much. The next question, please. Sorry, sir.
Yes, I just wanted to add also, I think green bonds, I mean, he has more knowledge about green bonds, but these will be way above SMEs, as they have said already. But one example I showed in the earlier session was that the African Development Bank has given lines of credit for particular projects, like Farai was saying, and the lines of credit go through the commercial banks, and the commercial banks are on top of these projects, and they can lend directly to SMEs. But to say green bonds will be way above you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question, please.
Okay. Yeah, because you run a federation, subnationals can actually go ahead and raise issuances themselves. But this is what is important, and I think Kaduna State is doing very well. We thank God for them. Lagos is on the way to issuing their bond. I know they have sorted out their framework, which the next thing they will do is to go to the market to go and raise their bond. Every subnational can do that. It is even easier for subnationals to raise green bond than the federal. The president can say, I want to raise green bond, and it will take forever before that comes to be. But what I have tend to find out within Nigeria is that subnationals, the decision change at subnational level is very short. The moment the governor is interested in anything, it gets done. In fact, the moment the governor is interested in anything, the state assembly queue behind the governor almost immediately. But here, the budget has to be done with by the National Assembly before the federal government were sent to it. What leaves MDAs to the National Assembly might not come out the way they look at it, though we're trying to work around the edges so that whatever project we are looking at in what MDAs have presented comes out that same way, so that we don't run into problem of having to take a project that we're going to finance, and at the end of the day, that project has been so much bastardized that it won't make the mark we wanted to make with it. So subnationals are okay. They can raise that bar. I know Kaduna State will do, in the sense that I've had one or two discussions within the DMO. DMO will still have to come in. The Ministry of Finance will have to come in. They will have to give them the pass, because they will look at what they have taken as loan and all those things before they can do that. Green bond is loan. So anybody that is issuing it is adding to his own deck stock. So we have to be very, very careful. But because you are using it to resolve climate change issues is now and in the future. So you could actually borrow to do that, as long as you do something that is impactful, that you can recover the funding, financially from. I think you're good to go. Thank you.
for energy or green buildings. So she wants to access financials to develop her medium and small estate development. What is the direct possible way for her to go about it?
In terms of obtaining the finance, or in terms of making the development green?
Yes, yes. She is gonna do green building, that is for sure. And she has the potential. And just imagine that is a project with all the green investments. So we just need the finance. How should she go about it?
If I'm not so familiar with the Nigerian context, you'll excuse me. So I can just give an example of how we went about it, at least in the Kenyan context. So first of all, you have to make sure that your internal reporting systems are very tight and in place. You must have a very good internal systems, because when the green bond with the green bond financiers, even though they look at the green features of the project, they'll also look at the other elements that make your project viable. So first of all, you have to make sure that you tick all the other elements. Are the projects viable? Do you have an ongoing business case? Are you able to indeed demonstrate that even though you obtain catalytic funding or even concessional, as Farah was talking about, the project will still be sustainable and successful? Then beyond that, once you have all your certifications done, because for you to be able to issue a green bond, you must be able to be certified. So Engage CBI, the Climate Bonds Initiative. I don't know if there's any other body in Nigeria that will be able to offer this, but globally you've got CBI, and they actually offer a lot of support to small and medium enterprises. So contact them for them to be able to certify what you're doing indeed to be green. Then once you have that done, reach out to the various financiers offering green bonds in that way. So I think for me, the most critical thing is to ensure you have a going concern in terms of the viability of the projects. You have certifications in place, then get the bond itself certified. If the challenge is also to be able to crowd in investors, you can be able to then talk to your local banks if you have instruments of guarantee, because this is able to pull in credit and to also make it, for you to be able to raise that faster. So I think that would be my quick solution or answer to that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes.
I think what you said is very correct, but the challenge with that is that for sovereign green bond, we rely on the country's rating. The rating of the country. If it is good enough, you can go to the market, and because it's denominated in your local currency, you don't really have much of a problem. But what you're relying on most is your country rating. For you to go ahead and say you want to issue, they must rate your company. They will dissect your company that you yourself, you get scared. In the sense that they want to be very, very sure that that company is organic. They want to be sure too that the fund, your startup fund, is a product of work creation. They want to know so many things about the way the company is run. Econ, that did it in Kenya, has a B1 rating over and above their country's rating.
Yeah, that's true.
So all these things come into play, and in that way, it makes it more difficult. It's not that it's going to be a cheaper fund to make matters worse. So essentially what we'll do is that we'll have to do a lot of advocacy. That's my suggestion to government, to see how concessions can come in if somebody is going to do green mortgage. We don't have a retail mortgage in this green mortgage in this country yet, but we'll get there. But for a startup company like yours or that has already existed, we'll have to do a lot of advocacy to ensure that we improve the system to be able to get some kind of concession in the rate you're getting and in the taxes that might have to take place. And you need support. FSD Africa is very, very good. FSD Africa is based in Kenya, but they cover the whole of Africa.
Yes.
FSD is Financial Sector Deepening Africa. They help everybody have access to the market, and they're looking for women to get this thing done, because we will have to mainstream gender in whatever we are doing. we may have a discussion after this to see how we can think out of the box to see what we can do. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I think to just add on to that, based on what you've said, what FSD can also help you with is to be able to fund you from a technical assistance perspective. So to just add on to what the speaker before me said, there's a lot of structure that needs to go in place in terms of your governance structures, your systems, your processes, which costs money. And if you're to get a guarantee, if you're to get a rating from whether it's Moody's or whoever it is that you're approaching, I think the best thing initially would be to start talking to people like FSD Africa, as he has said, and then write out a technical assistance paper. Then once they're able to come and look at the company, they actually do extend and support, to cover some of these costs.
That's encouraging.
Thank
Your company can get higher rating than Nigeria. See the possibility. So thank you so much for that. I can't give all the panelists the closing remarks, but I can only ask all the panelists to just give me 3 words, just 3 words on what someone should do in accessing or in applying for green finance, whatever finance maybe it is. Just 3 words on what should be these 3 words that I should have in my portfolio to access green finance. I'll start with James, sir.
Yeah, 3 words. Let's see how we can collaborate with government. 3 words, more than 3.
Well, I'm not vast in financing, but I can just tell you that make your project as green as possible.
Mr. Farai?
It's a difficult ask, isn't it? I've done my 3 already. I guess what I can say if I'm kept to 3 is call us, please, or email us, please. But no, seriously, I think I said certification show that there's a business case. I think none of the financiers here are in the business of funding projects that are not viable. So I think showing that they're green and that the projects are viable and that you have a solid management team and plan to manage the project, I think is important to access this financing. Because I think a lot of the time perception is green finance is easy to raise. This green finance will just get green finance. It's financing with green at the front, and the typical things you ask for in any financing, I want to ask for in a green financing.
Yeah.
Plus the certifications. Anyway, I'll stop there.
That's too much. Okay, right. Thank you. Yes, Mrs. Sheila?
I think he said what I was going to say. Green certifications, robust systems, proper governance structures. But the most critical one is you must be able to just tap into what you can get from your ecosystem, collaborative effort, because everyone plays a role. The financing institutions do play a role. Your local bodies do play a role. The tax body plays a role. So your banking system locally plays a role. So get as much as possible, collaboratively from your local system, because until you get the entire ecosystem working, then it becomes extremely expensive. So for me, make sure you tap into all the people who are available, the institutions available to support you in doing this.
Thank you so much. Mr. Solo, my sincere apologies. We stop you in the middle of the presentation. We really, really apologize for it. Do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you very much. I think my last 3 words is your project has to be feasible and sustainable, and in all aspects. When you're going for green financing. So if it does not make sense at a business case level, doesn't matter how green you make it, then the whole thing falls apart. Things will be my closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Any other questions? The physical panelists are ready to take it after the session. Thank you for that. Thank you everyone for joining online. We apologize for all the technical errors. Thank you.
Thank you
I
very
request
much.
people to go to the main hall for the closing remarks.
Thank you, everyone, and good luck.
Oh, thank you so much. We are very sorry. Mr. Solo, sincere apologies, please.
Thank you.
I'll mail an apology for you people. Thank you.